Good morning. Welcome to the Dyslexia Resource Center podcast, and I'm glad to be here with you today. I want to talk to you about the science of dyslexia. Don't zone out. Let's give it a try. I think it's important because I think the more that you as a parent, you as a teacher, you as a dyslexic can understand what's going on in your brain, and you can explain that to people, the more likely you are to seem that you're knowledgeable, that there is truth into what you're saying, and that no matter if it's your student as a teacher, your child as a parent, or you as a dyslexic, that hopefully this will enable you to get what you need and for you to understand dyslexia so that you're comfortable with dyslexia and that, again, you can advocate for yourself. I do want to say that this is the go-to book, Overcoming Dyslexia. This is the second edition by Dr. Sally Shaywitz. There's a lot here. I get it. And I get that not everybody wants to read all this. There is the Coursera course on dyslexia, which goes over a lot of it as well. But I think it's a great adjunct, at least the Coursera course or the book, if you're so inclined. But I'm going to do my best to help you understand why it's important to know what dyslexia is, what's the science behind it, talk about the functional MRIs, and then why it's important to identify dyslexia early. So let's go into talking about what is dyslexia. And dyslexia has a lot of definitions if you look on the internet. And the definition that I use, that the Dyslexia Resource Center uses, that you'll find in Sally's book on page 100, is in federal law. It's also in Louisiana law, and we call it the 21st century definition of dyslexia. There are definitions that are older, but I feel like this matches the science, and it really explains to you what dyslexia is. And so I'm going to read it to you, and it means an unexpected difficulty in reading for an individual who has the intelligence to be a much better reader. So we'll talk about that, and we've talked about that, but this discrepancy about the ability to read and the IQ, which is different in the dyslexic individual than the non-dyslexic. But let's keep going. So it's an unexpected difficulty in reading for an individual who has the intelligence to be a much better reader, most commonly caused by a difficulty in phonological processing. And that is the appreciation of the spoken word. And also, we're going to talk about this, how the spoken word has to match with the alphabet. It's making sense of all that. And that's where the dyslexic struggles. And it is the appreciation of the individual sounds of spoken language, which can affect the ability to read, as we said, the ability to spell, the ability to retrieve speech quickly. And we'll also talk about some other common problems that dyslexics can see. So again, before we go into the functional MRIs, it's important that you know the science of dyslexia, you know what the evidence shows, because unfortunately what I see a lot is parents spending money and time on things that are hypothetical, which means it may be true, it may not be true. There's no evidence. And because a dyslexic child has a really short window, just like all kids, but this is a child with a disability, to access reading, and they're going to have difficulty accessing the ability to read, that time and money are of the essence. And I think understanding the science makes the teacher, makes the parent, makes the dyslexic cognizant, aware of time is precious. Let's do this right. Okay, so we're going to talk about fMRIs, functional magnetic resonance imaging. And the reason we're going to talk about that is because that test really helped scientists understand where in the brain dyslexia, the problem with dyslexia lives, and it made it a valid entity. There have been historical documents that talked about really smart kids not being able to read, and they would call it word blindness. And that's gone on for hundreds of years. People knew that something was going on, but they didn't know how to explain it. And what the functional MRI does is it helps explain what is going on with a dyslexic when they're reading. So, functional MRIs are the functional magnetic resonance imaging. And so it's looking at magnetic properties in the brain. And so I'm going to try to explain this and hopefully it will make sense. But if you think about it, when you're given a task, and the task we're going to talk about today, of course, is reading. And reading, just like any other task that uses muscle, needs energy. So the brain has to have the energy to perform the task of reading. And what we're looking for is where's the particular area in the brain that's performing this task. And so the way that the brain gets energy, of course, is through the bloodstream, and of course with oxygen is one of the important things the brain needs. And so what the fMRI does is it is looking at the molecule hemoglobin, which carries the oxygen. And the studies, which have been done all around the world, and they all validated this concept, is that when a child is reading, this hemoglobin with the oxygen you're gonna see greater magnetic activity. There's going to be this blood flow and therefore more of this oxygen, and it's going to light up on the functional MRI. And it can tell you where what part of the brain, the child or the adult, is used for reading. So what they did, what again, multiple researchers have done around the world and in the United States, is they have the child get in the machine, the brain's in the machine, and they'll have the child read. And then they'll look at again, where's this blood flow? Where's this oxygen going? And what they saw was there was a difference between the readers that were dyslexic and the readers that are not. And what they found is that, of course, the majority of readers, 80% or so, who are not dyslexic, are reading from this left part of the brain, and the readers that are dyslexic are reading more from the right side of the brain. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So what they found is there are two areas of the brain where a non-dyslexic reader reads from. In the beginning, they're reading from a spot right above the left over the ear, and that's where beginning readers are doing what is called decoding. And what decoding, or we're going to back up, is based on is phonological awareness. And you'll remember we talked about that definition. That is that area, phonological processing, that dyslexics have a problem with. And phono is telephone or phonograph, sound. And so it's that appreciation of the spoken word. And so the dyslexic brain is not using those areas that rapidly understand that speech, the spoken word, is segmental. And so what I mean by that is the simple would be bat, is b-at. It's got those three different sounds. And so what you have to understand is that the spoken word has those components of sound that are integrated into an envelope of a word, but they're broken apart, and for reading, they're then attached to what we see as either lines and circles. And we want to make that make sense. And so what they found was this area that the early reader uses with that phonological awareness, and then decoding, which means taking that word apart to read it. And then the more sophisticated area back here on the left side is not really working in dyslexics. And instead, they may use this a little bit, but they don't have the connections to other parts of the brain that they should for reading, only reading, not intelligence. And they're reading more on this right side, and they're really reading more anteriorly. So that means they can read, but it's never fast. It's not easy. It's hard work. So the functional MRIs are incredibly important because it gives us validation that there is a difference in the brain where the dyslexics are reading from. And it's really important for parents and teachers to understand that, so that you understand to deliver reading instruction is going to look different for a dyslexic than a non-dyslexic. So let's go back to this phonological processing and phonological awareness, and just say that again, before you learn to read, you have to understand that the language, spoken language, is made up of these phonemes, as small as particles of sound: bat, b, at, 3 sounds, and then it's consolidated into one envelope of a sound, the word bat. And this is, obviously done seamlessly with time. This would be one of the beginning steps of reading, one of the hallmarks of, oh, could this child be dyslexic? And the reason that it's going on is they're using an inefficient system, say on this right side, say in this anterior area, maybe a little bit on the left, but not like a non-dyslexic reader. And that is what's going on. To continue on this process of talking about phonology, phonological processing, if you think about a child when they start to speak and are speaking at the age of 2, often though, a dyslexic child will be a delayed speaker, have to go to speech therapy, will learn to speak, but that may be a sign in this journey of the spoken language and matching it to print. Let's say you have a 2-year-old. They may or may not have gone to speech language therapy. And then you're starting to talk about rhyming. I think that starts pretty early, 3 years old, 2 and 3 and 4 years old for sure. You're introducing children to rhyming. And that is obviously anywhere from Jack and Jill run down the hill to Cat in the Hat. Those are incredible clues, and in its must part of the acquisition of reading. And you can see it comes very early on because, again, you have to understand that segmental nature of the spoken word before you can then go to the next step. So it would be the basis for what the child must learn to enter the language model to learn how to read. Very important. So then let's say somebody doesn't notice that, because it's a very good predictor of future reading. Then the child starts learning the alphabet, and not only the sequence A, B, C, D, but also the sounds of the alphabet, that the letter A can be an A or an ah, and B is B, C, K. And the dyslexic child will struggle with that as well, because that alphabetic principle is important too and necessary for the foundation of reading acquisition skills. So again, you're seeing all these early clues that the sound, that phonological processing, the sound and the awareness of words, whether it's first rhyming and then it's matching the sound to the letters and circles of the alphabet. And one thing that Dr. Shaywitz talks about quite a bit, and it's a test that we use at the DRC, which is really important, the CTOP, which is a comprehension test of phonological processing, is you can take a word and you can ask a child, can you take a word like beach ball? Say the word without ball, beach. Or high school. Say the word without high school. Now those are a little bit more sophisticated. So then let's go to, so what about them? THEM. What's the word without H? Tim. Or shout. What's the word without H? Sout. Or it may be again that ball. What's the word without B? All. It's hopefully I don't know if I'm doing the best at this, but I'm trying to get you to understand that we're looking for clues and that the child is having a hard time understanding that segmental nature of the word. And then if there is a problem with that, that should raise red flags that the child might be dyslexic, because they're not hearing and they're not understanding that this word, this envelope of sounds, can be pulled apart. So that is the basis. And once you know that the child is dyslexic, again, because they're using this inefficient system over here on the right side instead of the left, then you know that you're going to have to hopefully get them in a program that is very intense, it is very repetitive, and it's sequential. It's in a certain order, because they have this phonological awareness issue that must be addressed first. Then they must learn this alphabetic principle. Then they're going to go on to the phonics. So it's a very structured way to make sure that someone like a dyslexic who's having difficulty with that is not only exposed to each step, but becomes somewhat proficient in it as well. And I do want to say, as we talk about reading instruction in the schools, we talked about this left above the ear. That's where the novice reader starts reading. And that's really going to be more like the primers you see, with very one syllable words, which are usually a consonant vowel consonant, like sat, like bat, like rat. And then they're going to go, as they progress in phonics, to more complicated words, which will have, SH, GH on the end, etc. So if you think about it, the as they are progressing to become fluent readers, because that's what we want, and if they're going to use more of this posterior aspect of it's behind the ear, and that's called the visual word form area. So let's talk about, how does one go from print to making meaning of that? How does that work? So the eye is we have the retina in the back of the eye and the optic nerve. And the optic nerve, think of it as like the messenger to the brain. And it's really complicated. It's got this pathway. It goes through the brain. It crosses, et cetera, et cetera. But it's taking the picture, the visual picture of the words, to a place, again, to connect that written word to the spoken word so that it has meaning. And the visual word form area, which is the place that we talked about behind the ear, which is what you use to become a very fluent reader, it's looking at what the word looks like, it's looking at what the word sounds like, and it's looking at what the word means. And this is really important. It's considered like a hub, a big hub, and it's connected to other areas of the brain. And if you think about it, that's what you use to become a fluent reader, but it's not working well or much at all in the dyslexic. They still got to have those three things. They're just using areas in the brain that don't work as well. So again, what the word looks like, that's pretty easy. That kids often will learn sight words. Those are difficult words to sound out, but they can memorize what it looks like, and then when they see it, they know it. And as the child has been exposed to reading the same word over and over, they automatically match the what the word says to what it looks like. But then you've got the sound. How does it sound? So that's that decoding piece. Let's take a word like math, math, math would be the whole thing. But then you learn that TH is the, so it's math. So you're learning the sound of the word. You know how to sound out a word. You know what it looks like. You've learned that. And then the other thing that's helpful in reading is what the word means. So pretty, say pretty, or delicious. If you have that, even if you've never seen it written, but your verbal vocabulary knows that word, that's going to help you with your reading, because we're reading to comprehend. It's accuracy, but the accuracy is so then we can then, and this all goes so quickly, it's really remarkable, but that we're reading and we know what we've read. So again, it's taking this, what it looks like, what it sounds like, and what it means, and it's this hub, and that's thought to be what's happening with good readers as they get advanced. And that's an important concept, which we're going to come back to, because it's like, how do you best develop that aspect of your brain? That's incredibly important if that is what's crucial to become a fluent reader. I think we've talked about this, and hopefully it makes sense that, again, dyslexics, their IQ is average to above average. There's nothing wrong with their intelligence, their critical thinking. This area of the brain for reading that they're using is on the right side as opposed to the left. I do want to read, I think these are two great quotes, and these are in Sally's book on page 99. David Boies, who's a brilliant lawyer who's dyslexic, didn't know he was dyslexic until one of his twins was identified as dyslexic. But he said most annoying is when people equate dyslexia with a thinking disability. Dyslexia gives you the ability to see the entire picture and step back from it and think. Because reading is hard for a dyslexic, it forces you to rely more on thinking. And as you get out into the world, it is thinking that is a lot more prized than reading. And what we want to encourage you, of course, is that, one, we want to identify the dyslexics early so that they can learn to read, but they're also going to be great thinkers and they're going to succeed. The other one, Charles Schwab said, always had great strengths in thinking. Even though I couldn't read quickly, I could imagine things much faster than people who were stuck thinking sequentially. That helped in solving complex business problems. I could visualize how things would look at the end of the tunnel. I intuitively get there much more quickly. So again, we're talking a lot about how the brain is different from the reading perspective, but most importantly, their IQ, their way to critically think is there and is excellent. So we've been talking about why it's important to know the science of reading, and we've talked about basically what's going on from the functional MRIs showing that the blood with the oxygen connected to that hemoglobin is going to different places in a dyslexic versus a non-dyslexic reader. And we talked about how it impacts the phonology or the phonological awareness of understanding that the spoken word is segmented, and then taking those sounds of the spoken word and attaching them to the lines and circles. We also talked about how there are a lot of signs present early on that many, not all, dyslexics will have some episode of speech delay. And this could be, minor, or it could be a little bit more than minor, and it requires a speech therapist. Then we talked about how the child has to learn rhyming, or to hear the rhyming, part of that phonological awareness, and then the alphabet. So we're now talking about kindergartners. So in kindergarten, you're expected to know rhyming, to hear the rhyming, to be able to recite rhymes, to know the alphabet, and to put a sound to most of, not if not all, of your alphabetic letters. So that when you go in the first grade, you are ready to read or continue on that journey, because you're going to be immersed in phonics and really that print. And that first and second grade are huge grades, intensive for the acquisition of reading skills, building the vocabulary as well. We at the Dyslexia Resource Center would strongly advocate that kids are screened for dyslexia at the end of kindergarten. Some people have called for them to be screened before, but there's no valid testing or screening that can be done before the end of kindergarten. I wish there was, but at this point in time, the earliest that we can identify someone at risk on a screener for dyslexia is at the end of kindergarten with confidence. And then we recommend the testing when the child is at the end of kindergarten in the summer. We're really wanting the child to be 6 years old. The testing becomes much more valid. And then first grade is when we would ideally have the child identified as a dyslexic and in an evidence-based program. And we talked about how the program for dyslexics would focus on that phonemic awareness intently, so that you know that the child understands that these sounds in the spoken word can be pulled apart, matched to the alphabet, and then put back together. That would be step one. And that's going to happen in the first grade, along with then going into phonics, assuming they've got this alphabetic principle down, which they may not. It may take a lot of work before they're ready, because you can't skip one of these foundations to go leapfrog to say phonics that's more, let's see, what are my word retrieval issues, that's more sophisticated or has prefix or suffix. You're going to go obviously in an order of simple to more complex phonics. So we also know that in first grade, that the dyslexic kids have an academic gap. And it makes sense if we're thinking about they couldn't really hear the sounds of rhyming. They don't really know their alphabet well. They're behind, because those are all precursors. Those are all necessary steps. So it makes sense that there's that gap in the first grade. That gap doesn't go away. It can get larger and will get larger if not addressed. So our big focus is getting the first graders identified at risk and then tested to know they're dyslexic. So they're in a classroom in the first grade, getting what they need, not falling further behind. And that Orton Gillingham based instruction on the alphabetic principles, phonemic awareness, and phonics is delivered by trained teachers, sufficient duration every day, intensity until the skill set is learned. Now, what I do want to also emphasize, which is so important, is that at the same time, we want to introduce the child to literature. And of course, in the first grade, that's going to be a small book, but it's going to be more than just one word. We want them reading out loud every night, and we want the parent reading with them. And that is going to help them. And we'll talk about this in another podcast, but it's really important that the child is in that phonics-based rich program, that Orton Gillingham program. They're reading age-appropriate literature books, and they're also having lots of conversations, that you're talking to them, probing them with questions, helping them with their vocabulary, and then letting them talk. This is all part of the language model, and one is going to help the other. The reading is going to help the phonemic awareness. The phonemic awareness education is going to help the reading. So it's part and parcel to get these kids identified and what they need so they don't feel bad about themselves, and they're able to stay on track with their peers, access grade appropriate literature, and even though they might not be the fastest reader in the classroom, they know that they're smart and they can do great things. Okay, so I've enjoyed this. Of course, I love talking about this. I hope that this has been helpful to you as a parent, teacher, dyslexic student. And the main points are that because we have functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRIs, we now know that dyslexia is an entity. It has a name. We should use the name. It is specific. We know where the issue is in the brain. We know what dyslexia is. It's an unexpected difficulty due to this phonological processing, the appreciation of the spoken word. We know that IQ is average to above average. We know that we can screen with a great screener, the Dyslexia Shaywitz screener from Pearson at the end of kindergarten. We can then test them when they're in the summer after kindergarten at 6, close to 6. We can get them in a first grade class because they've already got an academic gap. But if we're giving them that targeted evidence-based instruction by a trained teacher, they're going to get what they need to make sure they have that phonemic awareness skills. And then they're going to learn and know the alphabetic principle. Then they'll be immersed in phonics, and they'll be on their way to the acquisition of reading skills so that they can then comprehend and stay in the class, stay on track, feel good about themselves. Now, it's important that you talk to your teachers or your school about the screener at the end of kindergarten, if your child's in kindergarten, or if your child had the screener. What does that mean? If you have questions, or if you cannot get screened or tested at your school, your child can, or the Dyslexia Resource Center can do that. This is not difficult. It shouldn't be something that breaks your bank account. We at the Dyslexia Resource Center only test for dyslexia, but it's very affordable because we do it that way. We want to make it so that the child knows why they're struggling, that it has a name, dyslexia, and again, that they're bright kids with an isolated deficit, reading from the right side of the brain instead of the left. Then, say your child's been identified with dyslexia, but they don't have trained teachers, they don't have a curriculum specific for dyslexia. The Dyslexia Resource Center also offers teacher training. So if you wanted to go through teacher training, if you're a teacher or a parent, we have both that do that. That is a 1 to 2 year process, but that would then equip you to either teach your students in school or teach your child at home. And then if you're like, I don't want to teach my child, I don't have the patience, we can offer that as well. We can do that over the computer and offer your child what is called dyslexia therapy. And basically, that therapy is that intensive intervention where the child is introduced to those concepts that are necessary for reading, and those are developed phonemic awareness, and then going on to phonics, giving the rich vocabulary, giving that repeated sequential structured instruction so that the child is able to read. So if you think any of those services are what you need or your child needs, then I encourage you to reach out to the website of the Dyslexia Resource Center or give us a call. But we're here to help you no matter where in the stage you are with your child that you either think is dyslexic, maybe dyslexic, or is dyslexic and need services.